So I'm going to start. Can I ask Shabnam Aggarwal to come up, please? Shabnam is CTO at Rising Academies. Can I get Jen Otieno, who you saw yesterday, but now is back as a panelist from EdTech Hub? Can I get Gayatri Nair Lobo, CEO of Educate Girls? Sorry. It was an all-women panel, and then we have Rob Alhadeff from Jackfruit coming in to represent. Thanks, guys. Thanks for being here. So I'll start with a fairly simple question, and I think everybody has mics, so thanks for that. What excites you most about AI's potential in education? And I'll just go down the line.
Ooh, first up. I think what excites me most about AI in education is that it's creating opportunities for us to accelerate stuff that does work and that we've already proven. And I think that I can go into more detail, but I'll leave it at that for now. I'm sure we'll talk about more.
Great. Hello, everyone, and thank you. I think one of the things that I'm most excited about it actually is the potential for inclusion. I think while we do focus a lot on the digital divide and the potential for that as well, I think also AI has an incredible opportunity to, for example, create more inclusion around minority languages. And as we've been talking about FLN for the last few days, and what really is it going to take to include most of our kind of, most rural, most disconnected communities, things like that, where it's always been incredibly hard to create resources that can serve those communities. I think the potential of AI to actually accelerate that and make it more resources more available more easily and more in a less expensive way is something that's really exciting.
Yeah. Thanks, Jen.
So for us at Educate Girls, I think AI gives us the opportunity to manage that trichotomy of faster, better, cheaper. We're able to, for example, reach out to and enroll many more girls in school at a much faster rate and at a much cheaper cost. I'll get into the details of that later.
Thanks.
Morning, everyone. I think for us, it's been about being able to scale things that connect with the individual. We end up talking mostly just schools, but we're really trying to figure out how you connect so much of the knowledge that would be in a room such as this with actually the schools directly, and then personalize it. And that's something that would have been too costly before AI.
Awesome, thank you. And I know each of you is using it slightly differently within your organization. So I'm going to ask you those specific use cases because I think it gives all of us a sense of how and what AI can be used for. So Shabnam, I'll start with you. Can you talk about why Rising decided to invest into the development of AI tools? And can you talk about some of the tools that you're developing?
Yeah, sure. And so Rising uses AI both internally for our operations as well as for some of the user-facing products that we build. About 3 years ago, Steph, we launched Rory. So Rory was our first AI-powered user-facing product. And the origins of Rory were really interesting. It was during COVID when we had started doing radio with our content, like radio lessons. And we realized there was so much interest that we wanted more ways to sort of access more and more students and give them this high quality math content that we had built. And WhatsApp was a really interesting channel for that. We saw how ubiquitous it was. And we also realized that it might give us a channel and an access into the home and into even students in schools potentially. And so at the beginning, actually 3.5 years ago, we were really not using that much AI in Rory. We were doing a little bit of natural language processing because we wanted it to be a much more natural conversation with students. And then we were using some machine learning. But LLMs were not very good back then, and so we couldn't really embed the LLM into a large part of Rory. And even to this day, actually, a large component of Rory's product is primarily manually written math questions and answers. And then there's a small component that is LLM driven. And the reason we have AI in Rory now, and the reason we put it into now a number of our products, we have about 4 products that use AI. Because it, as I said, accelerates components of the the product and the efficacy that we knew already worked. So now we will use it to generate content, but we will have a human in the loop to kind of check. Or in our teacher-facing product, Tari, which is also on WhatsApp, it helps teachers all across different geographies, which in the past we would have had to create separate products to manage different languages. And now we can pass teachers from Rwanda speaking Kinyarwanda all the way to teachers in Sierra Leone, and they can all ask for translations and different components of helping them with lesson generation or questions and answers, things like that. So from a user-facing standpoint, it's really, as Rob was saying, kind of created that opportunity for us to, rapidly generate the content and also generate solutions for our users. That's been really powerful for us.
Thanks. And the advantage of having me here is, does everybody know what LLMs and the other technical terms are? This is a genuine question. Steve says yes. Okay, amazing. No? How many no's? Okay, so we're all on it. Okay, amazing. Thanks,
Can I
Shabnam.
explain it?
If you can.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So, large language model, LLM, is effectively what powers the tools like ChatGPT, Claude. It's what sits underneath a lot of the AI work that you'll see today and a lot of the tools that you might interface with. And all it's really doing is figuring out basically the next word based on all of the content that's fed into it. And that content is really just like the entire internet. So that's a brief.
Thank you. I think good clarification from me. I'm going to go to Gayatri first and then Rob, but with the same question.
Okay.
You each talked about how your organization is using AI either to drive more efficiency or to reach that end user. So can you talk about how, Gayatri, you're using AI at Educate Girls, and then Rob, how you're thinking about it at Jackfruit?
Sure. So I'll talk about the example I spoke of where we are reaching out and enrolling more girls. And I'll have to give you a little context for that. So Educate Girls works in some of the most rural tribal areas of the country where girls still face patriarchy and therefore not being able to be enrolled in school. So what we were doing was through a network of thousands of volunteers going door to door and finding girls who were out of school. So we'd know, for example, District A in Rajasthan has the worst gender outcome, so let's go and saturate that entire district going door to door. But as we did that, over 10 years, we reached and enrolled about 300,000 girls. But we realized that actually you find them in clusters. It's not evenly distributed across every village and every district. And so we said, is there a way for us to predict and say where those clusters are so we're not wasting human resources going door to door? So we worked with ID Insight and developed what's called a random forest prediction model, and I don't know what that means. I'll tell you what it does. But what it does is it's able to tell us where these hotspots are. So what we realized through this data was that 40% of out-of-school girls come from 5% of India's villages. So by just focusing on, we have about 700,000 villages. So if we focused on 30,000 villages, we could reach 40% and solve 40% of the problem. And we did that in the next 6 years, because 1 year we had COVID disruption. But in 6 years, we reached 1.56 million girls, which otherwise would have taken us 45 years going the old method. So this data, the way the program was modeled was that we had 70 indicators for every village that we worked in, ranging from population to the age a woman becomes a mother first, how far the nearest school is. So 70 such indicators. We married that with data that we had collected over the last 10 years to be able to predict where these are. And of course, we then had ground truthing done. So our own team would go and survey a sample of the villages, and we had voluntary validation from the local elected members in those villages, and were able to validate this entire thing. So yeah, that's how we got faster, cheaper, better.
Love it. Rob?
Can I share something personal first?
Yes.
So we have always struggled with technology, the head of technology. It's always been a really, really expensive seat to fill, and something that I've always been really rigid on, you need to have huge output in this seat to justify the cost of that position. And I don't think we've got it quite right, which kind of sits with me. So a number of times I've ended up leading technology, and I have no background in technology at all. So a use case that has been hugely effective for me was actually using AI as my head of technology. And that sounds a bit weird, but like, I've literally told it like, be our CTO, and then I get on weekly stand-up calls, and then I drop the notes from Otter straight into ChatGPT, and I say, what have I missed? And it comes back and it tells me things. Or I'm like, one of our like developers was saying this, and I don't know, I actually don't know what he's talking about. And this has been this like weird, I mean, this happens, I suppose, when you start an organization and as it grows and stuff, but it's like so out of my depth. And I've learned a ton by like using it to like train me, which is interesting, which I just wanted to share. So we have done like kind of 3 different things to varying different levels of success. So at one point we were using the like general AI that's kind of embedded, because we did a bunch of our building originally on an open source platform called AppSheets, where you're just like no code writing, and it's a really cheap way to do it. And then Google bought AppSheets, and AppSheets had like an AI recommending tool in it. So we thought, great, let's try it. It was completely wrong. So it was giving like low, high, or medium risk for when we would like input the data. So we were trying to use it as like a credit scoring algorithm, and it really wasn't working at all because it wasn't trained. And I know we're coming onto this later, but this was like one of the biggest problems. We were like inputting data into this thing that it's never seen before. So it just didn't work. So we then switched on the credit scoring piece to machine learning, and then we did a random forest as well, which is just kind of like loads of machine learning algorithms like sitting alongside itself. I think. I think that's what it is.
He can dance and he knows what it means.
Well, it could teach me to dance. And then, but we would love to like take that to the next level and like increase that power, because for us, if we can really start to get AI to work on the credit scoring side, we want to then like broaden it to become a recommending tool. And this is kind of the big piece, and I know I've gone slightly off the question, but like for us, what we want to be doing is getting the data in and then giving recommendations back. And like this for me is the most exciting thing we could possibly do with this AI opportunity, is like a school director, rather than just getting a no, a yes, or sort of nothing, or it's kind of what happens right now is like on WhatsApp, one of our credit team will go back to the school and say, you need to improve this, and then come back. But that is getting harder and harder to scale, and it kind of comes back to my point. It's like, if we can get AI to be that recommending tool and then to be continually recommending as well and becoming like almost like a support function for the director, I think that will be amazing. But so far, we have not done that. We have tried, we've hard coded it, we've dropped it into all these different LLMs that were mentioned earlier, and ultimately, without huge amounts of human filtering, it's just wrong. Or it's not correct enough to ever let it go for it.
Thanks, Rob. It's really interesting to see how each of your organizations is, obviously you're all doing slightly different work, but it's really interesting to see how you're using it. But I'm going to turn to Jen, who's working with ministries through your Ministry AI Challenge.
Yes.
So how are government education departments thinking about the use of AI, and what are you learning through that process?
Yeah, and just to give a little bit of background on what the Ministry AI Challenge is. So through EdTech Hub, we launched what's called the AI Observatory and Action Lab. So basically thinking about what can we learn by kind of looking broadly, generating evidence around what people are thinking about in AI, what we're learning, but then also creating more kind of sandbox environments to actually do AI-based research. So working with organizations to generate evidence about how is AI actually helping or hindering the work that they're doing. And so the Ministry AI Challenge came out of a much bigger horizon scanning activity that we did with ministries, but also with entrepreneurs, with researchers, and lots of others. And so we created a lot of different use cases for AI, and the Ministry AI Challenge emerged from that. So basically, obviously knowing that ministries have tons of data, but don't really optimize the use of that data very well. Also kind of creating opportunities for interministerial connections of data, so looking broadly across data sets for, say, not just education, but child services or child welfare, health, environment, all of these different things where we're looking at climate, etc., and being able to use data from all across government to be able to say, how can we ensure learners are able to access schools consistently? How are we making sure that resources are allocated appropriately? And really trying to think about how can we support ministries. So what we've learned is that ministries are in very, very different places. So I think, on your chart before, there's definitely ministries on the what is AI scale? And then there are ministries that are like, I've got the exact use case. I know exactly what I want to do. This is the problem we're trying to solve. And they're really, really super clear. But there's quite a spectrum in there around where ministries are. Through our AI challenge, basically we're working with a number of different ministries across the global south to choose specific use cases, and then we're providing them with technical support to actually build out and experiment with tools that can leverage AI to help them, make one kind of step forward in terms of improving service delivery. So, for example, it might be around a predictive model where you're saying, we have a lot of floods or droughts in our country, and we know that that means kids can't access schools. How can we use data to help us predict where those effects are going to come, and then be able to proactively address those concerns, distribute resources or, reallocate learners to different schools, etc., to be able to make sure that learning is able to continue and actually to optimize the resources that different ministries have. So I think there's not a lot of evidence yet to guide. I think a lot of the ministries are kind of working to be a part of that evidence generation because there's still a lot to be learned at this point.
Thank you. And I think each of you has given us really interesting kind of starting points for how you're thinking about AI. So I'm going to flip the question and go back to the big hallucination in the room and say, what is keeping you up? What are your nightmares about AI? What is keeping you up about AI? So I'll do a quick round on that, and then I have very specific questions for you. I'll start with you, Rob, and then work my way around.
So when this all kind of came out, 12 months ago, when it became this kind of big mainstream thing that everyone knew about, we had to have a whole drains up internally because we gather loads of data and we had no idea where that data goes if our credit team or anyone in our organization starts dumping data into ChatGPT or anything else. We are in the process of getting audited by the central bank right now, which is always fun. And they don't really know how to audit this component. So they made us do a huge technology audit as part of the central bank audit. And we had to bring in KPMG, which is always fun as well. And they didn't know what to do as well. So the biggest thing I'm worried about right now is that someone suddenly is just going to dream up some data privacy thing that we are breached because we didn't know about it, and things are just going to spiral from there. So I think that's probably the most thing right now.
Thank you. There's a couple of us former KPMGs in the room. We know what you're talking about, just if you're wondering.
Reformed.
Gayatri.
For us, it's what if the data we're putting into the model is not actually giving the right predictions? What if we are still leaving out girls on the fringes because that data was not perfect? And therefore, the ground validation becomes so important for us. And we've also trained our teams to challenge the assumptions, challenge us and say, I'm sorry, you said this village is the problem solved. No, there are still 17 girls out of school. So then we can go back and perfect the model. But that's always a worry.
I think I echo both of those concerns, but also just generally cognitive offloading. I'm really worried about the over-reliance and over-trust in AI. So if, for example, you used AI to create your questions, and then all of us came up and we used AI to answer your questions, then why are we here, right? So I worry that we're gonna remove ourselves from the whole conversation, right? So I worry that we need to keep challenging and questioning why are we using AI to do these things, and what is the lived wisdom that we bring to these conversations that doesn't exist in those models, because otherwise we get these sanitized versions of the world that don't reflect the deep nuance and context in which we work. And so, yeah, I really hope that we keep that message going.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big one for sure. I think mine are a little bit more futuristic. So two things worry me most about AI right now. One is called persistent memory, and the idea behind persistent memory, as you may have experienced when you use ChatGPT or Claude, is that it does record and it keeps in its memory bank some bits of information about you. And that's owned by ChatGPT. So now if you were to port over to Claude or you wanted to move to a different tool, there's really no simple way for you to take that memory bank and move it. Now, apply that to our schools. Imagine we have our students using an AI tutor or AI bot, and all of that persistent memory lives inside a proprietary LLM or proprietary place. Now, let's say the school wants to switch to a new bot. All of that student's data that's sitting in that memory from that proprietary place can't port over. And when you think about governments and you expand this even further, okay, let's say I've deployed an AI bot to an entire nation, and that nation decides, okay, well, we want to switch, right? Because we all like to switch every so often, and they can't because they're now locked in. So I think persistent memory is a worry of mine because it's not something we're thinking about constantly at the moment, but it's as we start to see bigger and bigger proliferation of AI tools, especially in our schools, we're going to see students' data and teacher data and school level data locked in to a certain box unless we're really conscious about using open source tools or making sure that persistent memory layer is stored in somewhere that's accessible. So that's one piece. The second is AGI. So if you're not familiar with the term, it's artificial generalizable intelligence. And the idea behind this is that the AIs will start to do exactly what Jen said, but even more, and they'll start acting on our behalf and doing things for us and being even more intelligent than basically we are. It's a bit of a dystopia potential, and so it's something that definitely keeps me up at night.
I'm beginning to get a little worried now. So I'm going to go clean up my data. But I think we're all still using it. So I'm going to ask about very specific lenses that you're applying. And Shabnam, I'll start with you. Because ultimately, if we are using AI that is learner-facing, we do need to think about safeguarding and protection. And I know Rising spends a lot of time thinking about this. So if you can talk about just how do you layer, or how do you start with safeguarding and protection and then build your AI tools to help kids?
Yeah, I think this is a really important one. If any of you are thinking about, delivering tools that are AI powered to your students directly, and even to teachers, honestly. So I'll explain two examples, one that's learner facing and one teacher facing. On the student facing side, we had Rory from, as I explained earlier, and as and when we wanted to start embedding an LLM into Rory, a big concern of ours was, what if this goes off the rails? What if a student asks an illicit question or a self-harm question or something that's just not appropriate for an education context? What are we going to do? And so from pretty much day one, I think we were really overcautious almost about, and maybe appropriately cautious about this happening. And so we developed what's called a red team. And what that means is basically it's a group of people inside your organization who are basically responsible for pushing your tool to that illicit place and testing whether or not the product will bring them back off that ledge or stop the conversation. And we also have flags in place so that anytime we see any sort of concerning conversation happening from a student, we immediately get an email to all of the red team saying there's a conversation that's worrying that's happening with this student. Let's deal with it. So human in the loop is a critical component to AI still today, and I would say if you're talking about learner-facing products, again, please make sure you have a human in the loop at some point at all times. What that means is the AI is not purely acting on its own. Whenever there's a situation where a flag is raised, a human can come in and can deal with the situation. So that's the Rory example, and we continuously still do that. We almost never just blindly trust the LLMs to operate on their own. The other thing you can do is limit the number of turns. So what that means is as LLMs get further and deeper into a conversation, they can go further and further off the rails. So if you are thinking about using an LLM with students, again, you can stop sort of the LLM conversation after, let's say, 5 or 10 turns, and that will ensure that the conversation can't get past a certain sort of depth and certain point. So those are a few examples. I think on the teacher-facing side, do I still have time to explain this. So we have a product called Learn Lens that we've been playing with, and the idea is that we all know with, for example, TARL, we have students being diagnosed pretty frequently, and it's hard for teachers to grade those diagnostics all the time and then re-level the students. So one idea we had was, what if a teacher could just take a photograph on WhatsApp of all of the diagnostics that the students just took? We use Vision AI to grade those diagnostics. It's all handwritten. And then we send back the re-leveling that the students are at directly to the teacher. What we realized when we first tried this is, it's really hard to read student handwriting, even for Vision AI, especially when you get into contexts where, students in our context, they're, scratching something out, or they're writing the answer in the wrong place, or, the lighting is really bad on the photograph, or it's sort of tilted in the wrong way. So there's all these complexities. What we realized from a guardrails perspective as well, and this comes back to human in the loop, is that what we were doing at the beginning is when we couldn't read something properly, we were just guessing. And that was making the accuracy really bad. And also, teachers were not trusting the tool as much, because they could see when they looked at the paper, that's not what she wrote, and why is the product saying that? So what we did instead is, when we're not sure, we just passed it back to the teacher, and we said, I'm gonna box this part. We couldn't read that properly. Can you grade that one question for us so that we can ensure the accuracy is high? So those are other examples where bringing the human back into the loop can be really valuable.
Thanks, Shabnam, and I think really practical for all of us. I'm sure many people in this room are considering that, so thank you so much. Gayatri, I'm going to switch to you. As an organization, because there's also an organizational element to it, so as an organization, are you thinking about guidelines or policies that are essential as you develop and use AI? And how are you kind of, within an organization, balancing innovation with protection?
So as of now, we don't have any learner-facing AI. I've written down notes because we are thinking about it, so thanks. But the data that we collect is, at the end of the day, an individual's data. So we have a lot of data protection guidelines to ensure that it's not doesn't go outside. All of the standard ones and more. But we are thinking seriously about, when we start going learner-facing, what else do we need to add on?
Thanks. And Robert, you talked about trying to use AI and get this tool off the ground, but it has been a challenge, and you said that. So how's that impacting your operations as you think about the way you want to grow?
So, I mean, ultimately, we continue as is before AI was a thing. We continue to talk excitedly about what it could do. But the reality is that until it actually works properly, I mean, the big vision about it giving recommendations back to a school to make a change is meant to then tie into the incentive for learning program as well, where rather than saying to a school, every single school needs to improve the same thing, we want to say every single school needs to improve something that is very specific to that school. So it is still absolutely the big vision to be doing kind of IFL style lending, where we're promoting them to improve educational outcomes and then tying in a recommending tool that is powered by AI. But we are a long way to go. We have hard coded it, as I say, kind of just dumping it in and adjusting it. The other piece that we have done, though, which has been super helpful so far, is like an affordability calculator. So we launched a WhatsApp chatbot. We used Lovable, which is unbelievable. It took us a day to do it on something that it's super simple. It's just like questioning, asking, and answering. For us to like speed up the process of gathering the data from a school before we go and see the school, like super high touch stuff. And then it immediately prompts and tells the school whether or not it's within the right realms of the possibility. So that's already driven a lot of efficiency, just using something that's already out there and very low cost. So that was great. The big vision is the part that's expensive and difficult and complicated, and I can't be head of technology when that happens because it will blow up.
Thanks, Rob. And Jen, you mentioned evidence when you were talking about what works in AI. So would love to hear just what is evidence telling us so far about the use of AI in education, and where are the gaps in evidence? And what should organizations be generally considering as they're making decisions about AI?
Yeah, I think the evidence is still scarce, I think, in a lot of cases. And I think this is why there are so many great organizations who are really pushing to try and curate that evidence in a way that's easily accessible so people can make good decisions about it, but oftentimes it's not contextualized, right? So what may be working in one context is not working in another. And I think, this also makes it very difficult for people, policymakers, for example, to make decisions based on evidence. We know that tech is outpacing policy for sure, and will continue to, because the tech is advancing exponentially. The policies are going to always lag behind. So what that means is you've got a lot of things that are happening in schools, teachers using AI, learners using AI, not necessarily with the right safeguards in place, to your point, because people, like you said, Rob, they may not know what they don't know, right? We now, with my EdTech East Africa hat on, we've hosted a number of summits this year in Kenya, talking to lots of different stakeholders. And so capturing a lot of the qualitative data as well, not just sort of, quantitative data that's telling us what's the impact on learning outcomes, but also looking at experiences. What are people seeing? What are they doing? When we heard feedback, for example, we had a learner summit, and we had learners coming to us and saying, well, I don't want my homework being used to train models. Things that we wouldn't necessarily think about when we think about evidence, but are really important for us to kind of be listening to, talking to teachers, hearing what they're thinking about, what they're concerned about. So I think, a lot of that kind of evidence, that kind of data is going to be hyper-localized, right? What's the context of a school or a community and how they're experiencing AI in their context. So I think while we continue to kind of, lots of research organizations are pushing forward with trying to create more rigorous studies on how AI is being used, what is the impact on learning outcomes. I think AIforeducation.org, if people are looking for that evidence, they've curated studies from all over the world, but especially with a focus on the Global South. They've done a lot of kind of analysis of that evidence, pulling out the kind of biggest, what do we specifically know that can be really helpful to people who are trying to make decisions about how to integrate AI into their work. But we're gonna keep lagging behind with the evidence because, again, the tech is moving so fast, right? So I think we have to make sure in the context of evidence that we're not just waiting for the studies to come out. We have to go out, we have to be doing a lot of implementation-based research with the communities and the users that we serve, and doing a lot of listening to get that qualitative inputs as well into how we think about the ways that evidence can impact the work that we're doing.
Thanks, Jen, and thank you all for kind of getting us started on that. I have a million more questions.
Can I make a plug, an evidence plug? I don't know if all of you have met the MindSpark. I think there's 2 people here from MindSpark, but they just had an incredible study published by Karthik Muralidharan on the impact of personalized and adaptive learning in India. And I just want to, the reason I'm calling that out is I don't think it had AI in it, but it's one of the first studies we actually saw showing EdTech was actually on its own impactful. So to Jen's point, we're still really lagging behind. We've been doing EdTech for a long time, and it's one of the first times we're actually seeing PAL show evidence. And so, like she said, don't wait for the RCTs to come out, but that was a very powerful study, and I think I would welcome, their perspective on if AI were to be included there on MindSpark, would that further create efficiencies and further impact? But I just wanted to call that out.
Thanks, no, and I think that's a good point to make. I have a million more questions, not AI generated. I promise you the individualized questions came from me and them. But I know you guys probably have questions as well. So I'm gonna open the floor for questions. I already see hands, so I'm gonna give it a second. I'll take a couple of questions. I'm gonna take 3 questions from this side of the room, get them to answer, and then I see you, Morty and Jeff. I'll come to you guys on this side of the room, and Zia on a second round. So I don't know if we have extra mics. Yes, we do, they're coming from the back. So we're gonna do, Habib, I'm gonna start here, if that's okay, please. So it's gonna be up here, and then Valentine, and then Habib.
Thank you so much for this great panel. I am one of the What is AI people. I do community organizing in and around public schools in northern Uganda, and some of what you're talking about just feels so exciting and possible. And do we all have to invent our own forest something models? And do we all have to figure out this WhatsApp, Tarl response, which seems so relevant to so many people in this room? Can we pay you for that? Is that something GSF is going to help, like, if there are free options, if there are pay options, here's what's available to all of us? I definitely can't reinvent any of these things, but I would love to use them.
Thank you. We'll take the question from Valentine and then back here. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Valentine from IDO. We're also an EdTech solution similar to MindSpark. So we've been, sort of trying out AI as well for structured pedagogy and for PAL, digital personalized learning. And with that, we've been working with Google towards kind of AI-generated lesson plans as well to help with the teachers. And we're also looking at, we've received a small grant from Cisco looking at LLMs for structured pedagogy materials in Nigeria as well. So, but I'm thinking about funding, and when we have these sort of big tech organizations, how can we leverage them to also use their expertise to help organizations rather than just funding? Because at the moment, they are giving a lot out to kind of for people to generate more sort of AI solutions within sort of non-traditional sectors for them, such as education, but how can we leverage that for expertise as well?
Thank you. You guys, can I take one more question? Okay, thank you. Habib.
Thank you. So the first person, before I go into my questions, the first person, we're definitely exploring supporting the community with AI at GSF. To Shabnam, please. I wanted to ask what's the potential for SLMs, the small language models, compared to LLMs, especially in dealing with accuracy and data privacy. What promise might it hold for organizations who potentially are dealing with sensitive data, especially learner-facing solutions? My second question would be for the non-technical CEOs, and potentially Jen. What kind of questions do you ask AI providers to guarantee the minimum level of safety and privacy required when you're procuring? Thanks.
Thanks, Habib. So I will let you take it in any order. There's a question about how do we not reinvent the wheel, and I know some of you are looking to take your products out, so if you want to address that. There was a question about how do we get more than funding from some of these companies, and then Shabnam, I didn't even understand LLMs, and now we're talking about SLMs, and how you guys are evaluating some of those providers. So I'll maybe just go down the row, if that's okay?
Can I answer all three? Okay. And then I'll pass it to you guys. On the question of sort of build versus buy, I agree. It doesn't make sense to always build. It's very expensive. Definitely try to either buy or borrow or steal, whatever is possible. I think what's lucky about our space is that a lot of us are willing to share, and many of our tools are publicly available. Tari, for example, which is our teacher-facing WhatsApp bot, publicly available. You can take the phone number and use it. On the second question on big tech, I think what's one big thing that's been really powerful for us, so we have a partnership with Claude, and they don't actually give us any money, but they do give us engineering expertise and a little bit of insight into their roadmap of what's coming down the line. They don't tell us well in advance. I don't know when AGI is coming, but they will give us a little bit of a view as to how Claude is going to change. So for example, Claude had study mode, or a version of study mode that was like an education tool. And so we were able to kind of test that a little bit in advance, and we have weekly calls with their technical team. So that might be one idea of how to use. And then they'll also give you free compute. What that means is every time you ping an LLM through an API, sorry, that was, okay.
I know what an API is.
I was like, oh God. It costs money. It costs cents every time. And what a lot of the big tech companies, because they like social enterprise, they like social impact, they'll give you free compute, which just means a number of credits to use their products. Just make sure you give them that PR story, and they would love it. On the SLMs, great question. So brief background. SLM stands for small language model. LLM stands for large language model. The big difference is sort of the amount of space. So we've all heard, for example, that LLMs are eating up entire vast expanses in southern parts of America, and so they not only are huge and they require massive data centers, but they're impossible to sort of put on your phone, for example. So the point that he's making is, with a small language model, they've become so small now that you literally could put it on a laptop or you could put it on your phone. And what that is amazing about that in our space is a lot of us work in offline contexts where we can't always be pinging the internet, not only because connectivity is poor or intermittent, but also because it's expensive. That data cost is really expensive. So the opportunity for small language models is massive. Also, you're not sending all that data into the cloud and into outside servers. So when you're talking to governments, for example, a big question is data sovereignty. They want to know, where are you going to host this data? Because I want to make sure that this stays in our country. That's really hard with LLMs because they don't have local data centers in a lot of the countries we work in. And so SLMs are cool. You're usually open source. So if you go look on Claude or on GPT and ask it about SLMs, it'll tell you about the ones that are most appropriate for you. You can also fine tune them a little bit more to your specific use case. So you can even make them smaller and say, look, I'm only trying to do this one thing. I'm trying to help teachers do lesson plan generation in Uganda, and it'll fine tune it even more. You can pass it some of your own information. So let's say now you have a ton of your own lesson plans because you've been doing this for many years, and you want to feed that into the system and say, use this as your basis or your template, and then generate things on top of that. It can do a lot of that. So I'll stop there.
That's great, thank you. Jen?
Sure. I think Shabnam said a few of the things I was going to say, but I'll just add on maybe a few ideas. So in terms of the credits piece, I think this is so valuable. So there's AWS has an initiative right now called Education for Equity, where they're supporting organizations across the world to access credits and technical expertise to help them think about integrating technology, but AI specifically, but with an intentionality around accessing proximate leaders in rural communities. So making sure that, again, to address some of the concerns around digital divide, making sure that actually they're thinking about how do we make sure that it's not just urban-based organizations, entrepreneurs who are able to integrate AI into their solutions. How do we really think about making sure that we're providing the right supports and resources to those that are operating in very rural contexts and are really deeply integrated into their communities to be able to do some of that. So I think that there's a move in the tech community, again, to try and figure out how do they address some of what they understand to be some of these big gaps as well. I think also, again, maybe not direct funding, but Google DeepMind and Raspberry Pi Foundation have been leading an initiative called Experience AI, and they've been working to build the capacity of teachers. I know Google for Education is also really pushing the AI literacy for teachers, and so I think a lot of big tech is may not be giving direct money for those things, but definitely are trying to build the resources, open source, that can be used in many, many contexts around the world by organizations to be able to make sure that as you try to bring AI into to the communities and the schools that you're serving, that you have resources that you don't have to build from scratch. You're not reinventing the wheel, but that you've got evidence-based, tested resources for how to build literacy amongst teachers and learners and others. I would, just to add on the privacy safety side, I think this is one of the big things that, and now with my EdTech Hub hat on, with the ministries, that they are quite concerned about data sovereignty, of course, data privacy. How do they put those right safeguards in place? I don't think there's a single roadmap for this, and I think it is something that, as we continue to engage with ministries across the Global South, we're trying to figure out, like, how do we provide them with the right guidance? We are pulling in big tech into that to help provide some of the guidance, as they have a bit more, I would say, experience in kind of designing and thinking about some of this. Obviously, they have their own motivations for the data as well, but I think it's really important that we continue to have this conversation, not just on an individual user basis, right? That's important, but at a systems level, how do we make sure that ministries and policymakers are also putting in really evidence-based policies to support privacy and security? And then again, that policy needs to be thought about, of course, the implementation. So how do we then build the capacity of every individual within the system to make sure that they have the capacity to actually uphold those data privacy and data sovereignty procedures?
Thanks, Jen.
So I'll just quickly answer on the LLM, SLM bit as well. So we are looking at using SLMs for multiple reasons. One, the cost. Two, the offline mode, because only 20% of our older girls have access to smartphones. The younger ones don't have anything. But at least in the study centers, we can have some offline devices which they can use. And it can be limited to the curriculum that they have to study. So it's not like they can access anything anywhere in the world. So that's one of the things we're doing. On the data security and privacy side, India has decent laws on that now. But having said that, all of the data that we give externally would get anonymized. We have strict NDAs, but at the end of the day, we're not protecting ourselves from any issues, but for us, it's learners that we want to protect, and it's largely girls and women we're working with, so it's even more essential. As a non-tech CEO, I can ask stupid questions. The problem is I don't understand the answers. And therefore, I actually have a group of tech advisors that I go to, and they would then look at every proposal that comes in and make sure that the girls are protected.
I also have a group of advisors. I think that is the only way. Just a couple additional points. So on Shabnam's point about like free credits, we kind of, I'm like sharing this like big vision that we've got, and one of our board was like, well, have you modeled this if you don't get free credits? And we did, and it was terrifying how much it would cost. So I think that's just like a word of caution, because we're all like keen to say AI when we are pitching and fundraising, all these things, and the costs are pretty massive. And especially I've seen some of these grants, and we haven't won any of these grants, but I've seen some of the grants where they give you a grant to build on their system and within their environment, and then no sort of long-term commitment to giving you continual credits. I'm sure some do, but I think that's just like a word of warning. And then I would love if the GSF community did like a taxonomy or something of like of what everyone has built, because the build versus buy is a never-ending debate for us, and then we have to go out and see what is out there. It would be pretty amazing to have it kind of within this community.
Can I add one thought, one more thing on data privacy and security. I think we recently held a national EdTech summit here in Kenya, and we held a debate basically around AI with skeptics and early adopters and going back and forth. And one of the questions that was raised was, if the data privacy laws are broken, who is held responsible? And there was quite a lot of debate in that. Is it the tech company? Is it the government? Is it the teacher themselves? Is it who are we holding accountable? And I think even when the laws exist or kind of guardrails exist, we have not come to consensus about what does it mean if it's not upheld, and how do we negotiate through that as a community.
Yeah. KPMG told us that they like highlighted some case law around like data gathering and said whoever gathers the data is at fault. So that was pretty scary, but it was like not relevant to AI. So because as you say, there was no like AI relevant law to apply to. They told us that, and I was like, oh.
Any other questions? I'll take Jeff's, but any other questions? I've got Tom. All right, so we'll take two. So Jeff, I think the mic's coming to you. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for all that you shared. One other dimension I've been thinking about is with AI taking over some things that have been uniquely human to date, and changing the nature of work in ways that I think might be more radical and faster than any of us assumed. It raises the questions of what are the most important aims of education, purposes, objectives, and therefore learning experiences. And I'm curious how you think about the importance of those questions in this conversation, and also what are your thoughts on those questions?
Thank you. Great question. And I think Tom over here had a question as well.
Thank you. That was just to really build up the question. Mine was really a build off Jeff's, which is, I think it's been a really fascinating conversation, but one of the things that we've had a lot of conversations with about partners is in a sort of AI world, actually one of the big guardrails is what we're teaching and the skills we're building for our learners in order to be able to navigate that world really effectively and to thrive in the rest of their lives. And obviously, Skills Builder Partnership, we focus a lot on transferable skills, so obviously that for us is a really important part of the equation, but I'd be really keen to hear thoughts from the panel about what are the implications for the content of the learning and ensuring that young people also are set up to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you both for those questions. I'm going to let any of you answer, whoever wants to. So Gayatri, I'll start with
I
you.
can try a combined answer if that's okay. So with our program which we run with older girls who've dropped out of school maybe 10, 12 years ago, we bring them back into study groups so that they can write their 10th and 12th standard exams and get the school passing certification. It could be just a personalized learning device that we give to every girl and say, go study and write your exam. But to your point, that's not what we're looking to do. It's not just about passing the exam. It's about building confidence in these girls who've never interacted with people outside of their family ever since they've been married, sometimes married at the age of 12, right? And it's about building their agency. And I was telling Morty at breakfast today, when you talk to them the first time they come into a camp, they're looking at their feet. They're not even making eye contact. So we could, for example, give them the entire year's curriculum in textbooks and say, go study on your own and come back and write your exam. But we give it to them in bite sizes so that they have to come to the camp. What that does is it builds friendships, it builds a peer network that they can go to, it builds confidence, it builds agency, all of that, which I don't think today AI can do.
Okay.
I think one thing to be maybe contrarian a little bit is that, when the calculators came out, teachers were really nervous to allow students to use calculators in class. And I think we're in a similar state of affairs right now where it is a bit nerve-wracking. We did see for a while where people were trying to use AI detectors at the college level to see if students were using those to write their essays. And so, and we've realized those don't work, so don't try that. But, I do think it's important to recognize we don't know actually where the puck is going. It's really hard right now to predict out 10 to 15 years, whereas 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it was pretty obvious, I think, at the time it felt like we knew where the puck was going and we could teach to that direction because we knew sort of what the job market would look like and what would make you employable. I think it's really hard to know that now. And so what's more important is actually opening up our classrooms and allowing students to pick up these newer technologies or at least access them and be comfortable with them, confident with them, so that when they are in the job market and something new comes out like AGI or the glasses or whatever is going on, they're not going to be scared to use those products. And that's going to feel like just another tool that's in their tool belt alongside foundational math and literacy. So I wouldn't let any of that go by any means, but I think the thing to accept now as educators is that we don't really know where the puck is going. And so we just have to make sure we're helping our kids be comfortable in that environment.
Thanks, Shabnam. Before I get to one more question, I was actually going to throw a question to Cleo, if that's okay, because you have a much more global view. We've heard a few use cases here, but you're also seeing a global view of what organizations are testing or where they're experimenting with AI. So Cleo, if you have anything that you want to add about potential uses of AI that you've seen through your work.
Thanks a lot. And if we've made the subliminal association between AI in education and Gates, it means we've done something right in our comms. So yeah, we're very interested in AI, and some of our partners are actually on stage and have spoken to some of the use cases. And at this stage, we're supporting a bunch of different use cases across the board, from student-facing to teacher-facing to system-facing. Specific use case that I'm particularly excited about, even if, as was emphasized by the panel, the evidence is not yet there, are around, the key pillars to improving the quality of teaching. So if you take, assessments, for instance, automated speech recognition, that automates one-on-one assessment is, a place where, as maybe I mentioned to some of you, huge improvements have already happened in India at scale, with Vanwani in Gujarat and, Pratham AI in other places. So that's definitely one place, one area of that with a lot of interest on our side. And, this ASR technology can, be used for, to give feedback to students, to give information to teachers, but so that's one use case. We're also very interested in use cases around teacher support, and so there are different experiences around chatbots. none of them, I think there's not enough evidence around them, but it feels like a very attractive use to, in places where there's not enough training, not enough contacts with professionals to supplement, the support to teachers through AI. And then a third one is around the materials generation. And I think Inspiring Teacher was speaking about one use case yesterday, Alhadeff in Senegal, that Dr. Rouf Kagia spoke about, is also experimenting with that. And so, on the assessments, teacher support, and material size, these are examples of things we're excited about.
Thanks, Cleo, and thanks for letting me come to you. We're gonna try and stick to time, so I will take one last question from Victoria.
Curious about on use cases, because yesterday we've spoken a lot about how do we co-create with teachers, how do we co-create with communities, and also not a tech person, but what I understand with things like Lovable, everybody can basically, now not everybody, but it's so much easier to create your own app or to create your own tool. And so I'm just curious if you know use cases, or how do you think about really actually giving like the access to, or having teachers and communities just design their own solutions? Because I think a lot of what we're talking about here is, again, a organization or a tech team somewhere is creating amazing tools for teachers or for communities to use, but how can we actually say, hey, there's this Lovable thing or this tool, and you can just create your own solution that you need right now in your school, in your community today, and maybe tomorrow you even need a new thing. Maybe that's naive, but just curious about what you've seen about that and how you think about that. Thank you.
Go for it, Jen.
Yeah, thanks, Victoria. I think, again, I'll just say again, AIforeducation.org is a great place to look for these use cases. They've done a ton of work looking at, all across the world about what kinds of use cases are actually, what exists, but then also what are the most common, have the most backing of the evidence that we do have, which ones are being shown to be most effective, etc. So there's lots there. There's also benchmarking that the team has been doing to talk about how different models serve different purposes at different costs. So talking a little bit about, again, kind of the return on those investments, as we've said, that can be expensive to use some of these tools, but which ones are creating best, most accurate kind of content, responses, different things. So they have a ton of resources there. And again, they're constantly updating that work, constantly scanning, talking to partners, trying to bring up those case studies and tell those stories about what's existing in our ecosystem and making sure that, that information is accessible to anyone who wants to use it. The other thing I will say is, again, back to this kind of purpose question, like I agree with Cleo in that we want to be thinking about how are teachers thriving with AI, and what is it that matters to them, and how can we ensure that thriving has their voice at the center, but then also we're generating evidence about how does that work. So I mentioned part of the work we're doing at the AI Observatory is this ministry challenge. The other piece is these like teacher sandboxes. And so these are going to be kicking off now. We're going to be doing a ton of work with different organizations that are teacher serving, talking directly with teachers, generating evidence about, again, how are specific tools and supports working for teachers? What can we learn from that? That'll all be obviously shared out, open source. We're trying to get as much of this evidence out into the hands of people who need to make decisions as quickly as possible, because again, we know there is a big push to, again, think about how do we adopt these tools, but we want to make sure that it's adopted in a way that is evidence-based, is responsible, and makes sense from a cost efficiency for people that are trying to leverage scarce resources. We don't want people making, just sort of throwing money at tech. The tech is a tool. It's not the answer, right? The tool needs to be fit for purpose and all of those things to make sure that you're actually achieving the goals that you want to achieve, as opposed to, hey, this tech looks cool. Let me figure out how do I fit it into what I'm doing. It's got to start with like, what am I trying to achieve and for whom?
Can I add something? Yes. Excuse me. I think, Victoria, the idea of having your teachers use Lovable to create their own app, it's a beautiful idea. And I think it actually is wonderful for piloting and testing different ideas out, doing a little bit of like proof of concept. I think one of the challenges about letting that maybe persist for too long is that, especially in education, interoperability, which just means products being able to speak to one another or being able to connect to your government database or wherever the connections and wiring needs to happen, that gets a little bit harder with some of these tools. So it's a great way to give people who are non-technical that feeling of, oh my gosh, I just created this app that helps kids practice science. And I think that can really light a fire in people and in their imagination, and also gives teachers that access to AI that I was just talking about. But on the other hand, to Jen's point as well, then making sure to pull back and kind of step back and look at, okay, where is the evidence now? And also what is going to persist and what is going to sustain over time? And then the cost side as well, right? So thinking about what are all the different components to make this a more scalable, sustainable solution over time. But I think it's really great for these like design sessions and ideation.
Thank you. Thank you all. This is just the start of the conversation. I think GSF is really trying to think about what we can do to at least collate the information. So Habib, if we can get the QR code up, for any of you that wants to stay connected with this topic, if you can please do Habib a solid and fill out the survey. It will help us think about where we can curate, where we can set up working groups and what we can do. Please put your name and information in there so that we can get in touch with you soon after this. And if you don't know Habib, can you stand up? Thank you. Habib and Ekaterina are working on how to support with AI. So they're the ones you need to follow up with after this. So thank you very much for that. I'm gonna let us go, but before we do, can I please get a huge round of applause for my panel? I certainly learned new things today, which is very exciting, even though I don't quite understand them, but I'm gonna try. But also I think I'm taking two things away. One, you can't eliminate the human in the process, which is very, very reassuring, because all of you are talking about just the checks and balances that you're putting in. And I think we're just gonna have to think about what is the safest way we can deploy this that's helping the learner and the teacher and all of our own organizations. So thank you for sharing, thank you for being, and the shameless stealing. So if you don't mind, if there's anything you wanna share or anything that anybody else wants to share, please put the links into the WhatsApp groups so others can access, whether it's Tari or whether it's any of the other products that you have that I think would be super helpful for everyone here. But thank you. We're going into a coffee and tea break. We're opening those doors again so you can go out through the marketplace. I think there's still some folks out there with lovely goodies for you to look at. We're back in here at 11 for the session on climate. Thank you again, and thanks to you guys.